Greetings and blessings to all of our viewers. Baruch Hashem, we're starting a new Sefer of the 5 books of Moshe. That is Pashas Shemot. It's also the first of the Shovavim, the first parsha, the first section that we deal with insofar as the special weeks of Shovavim are concerned. There are 6 weeks. And the beginning of Pashas Shemot tells us a remarkable story. The Torah narrates the miracles that surrounded Moshe Rabbeinu's birth. Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, will be the redeemer of the Jewish people. And the Torah records that when he was born to Yocheved and to Amram, they saw that there was something unique, something special. He was very, very good. There was a special light that surrounded Moshe. They were able to hide him for 3 months because, after all, there was an evil decree against all Jewish children that were born, and they happened to be males, so they were supposed to be cast and drowned in the sea. So the parents could not hide Moshe Rabbeinu anymore. It was apparent that his life was at stake. He was in great danger. So the mother had no choice. She placed Moshe Rabbeinu, a baby, in a reed basket and cast him into the sea. And all of a sudden, with great drama, the Torah records of all people that, so to speak, uncovered Moshe Rabbeinu, found Moshe Rabbeinu, took him into her home, was of all people the daughter of Paroi. Very fascinating. And she sent her maidservant, and the maidservant took Moshe. And afterwards, it tells us that she had great rachmanis v'tachma elolav. Basya, the daughter of Paroi, had great compassion upon Moshe, and she realized he was Miyalbei or Ivrim, and nevertheless she raised him, and she told Miriam, his sister, to bring a woman who can deal with the child. And of course, we know that she called upon Yocheved, that was the mother of the child, unaware to Basya that this was the mother of the child, that she should be the one that would be the nurse of this beautiful boy, this beautiful baby boy that she discovered in the Nile River. And not only that, like the Chazal say, that she also paid her wages to raise Moshe Rabbeinu. However, he was supposed to be raised in her palace. So this is a very fascinating story, and we ask ourselves, what is the relevance of the Torah telling us that the Hashkocha Elyono, the Shechina HaKadoshah, decided that Moshe Rabbeinu should be saved by Basya, and there's no question about it. There was a tremendous merit for Basya, because Chazal tell us there was such a great merit that Basya, the daughter of Pharaoh, saved Moshe Rabbeinu in the Nile River, that upon her histalkus from the world, when she left this world for her heavenly habitation, so she was taken to heaven alive. The few people that did not die, she was taken to heaven alive. Why? She says there's such a great reward because she saved Moshe Rabbeinu, and because of that, she has an outstanding status insofar as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is concerned, and therefore did a great miracle. But we're asking a different question: what is the significance of the entire episode? It would appear that the Hashkocha Elyono was interested to tell us a tremendous lesson, that even in the darkness, in the crucible of affliction that the Jewish people had to suffer, the terrible pain, at times overwhelming, overpowering, of having little children snatched away from the mother's bosom and cast and drowned in the Nile River. So in that dark, dreary night of terrible suffering and pain, nonetheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's illumination, there was a revelation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not totally withdraw into his heavenly abode. There was no Hester Panim like we're used to explaining, but even in the limited Hester Panim that we had, and the reason it was limited because HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifested a tremendous revelation that he is still the one that is in control, and in this dark, dreary night of Klal Yisrael suffering cruelty and brutality, ultimately they will be saved. It was to strengthen the emunah of the Jewish people in these dark days. It was one of the great ironies of all time that it was the daughter of Paro who was the one that decreed that all Jewish male children should be drowned in the Nile River. So it was the daughter of this terrible Russia, a Stalin, a Hitler. It was his daughter that saved this Redeemer and raised the Redeemer of Klal Yisrael in her home. And more ironic is that everything that Paro did in order to make sure that the Redeemer of the Jewish people does not come into this world, because after all, he believed in astrology, and his astrologist told him that for sure there's going to be a Redeemer, and that Redeemer has to be killed before he will make a tremendous revolution in Mitzrayim. So every single method available to Paro to prevent Moshe's birth, and ultimately Moshe, when he realizes his strength and he will redeem the Jewish people, so he tried everything to avoid having Moshe Rabbeinu come into this world. And it was Dafke, specifically his daughter, that turned everything topsy-turvy. She saved him and she raised him in the home of Paro, and Paro also contributed to his education, and Paro at the end assigned him the most prestigious position in his home. And he was the one that Paro had tried every possible method to prevent him coming into the world. Paro ultimately was the one that raised him to nobility. He was the one, like Evan Ezra said, gave him a character of royalty, educated him, and gave him all the opportunities to grow and develop to be a king of Israel. A real fascinating story. And here we see that if we have a sensitive heart and a keen eye, even in times of darkness, there's an illumination of the Hashgacha Elyono, and the purpose is to show us, to demonstrate beyond any doubt that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still the Baal HaBira, he is still in control, and ultimately the Jewish people will be saved, there will be a redemption, and there will be a salvation. Afterwards, Moshe Rabbeinu is forced to run away from Paro. Paro realizes exactly what happens, and afterwards he's intent on murdering Moshe Rabbeinu, who was raised as his grandson by his daughter, and he was also raised as a son by Paro himself. And then the Torah describes the ruthless treatment that the Jewish people received. Old Pharaoh died. it became unbearable. The affliction, insofar as the slaves of the Jewish people is concerned, their slavery became intolerable. And they screamed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save them. And indeed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is turning to them, like it says in the pasuk, "Vayishmer Elokim es Nakoso, Vayitzchak Elokim es Brisoi, es Avrom es Yitzchak es Yankiv. Vayaru Elokim es Bnei Yisrael, Vayeda Elokim." HaKadosh Baruch Hu is turning to them, and we have the four expressions, the four expressions of redemption. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu now is undertaking to redeem the Jewish people gradually from Mitzrayim. Before, there was only Hester Panim with a slight revelation, a slight illumination, like we mentioned a moment ago. But now, a new reality is about to emerge. The Jewish bondage, the fact that they were now in a slavery where the affliction was intolerable. It's been a period where the people experience, to a large extent, almost complete alienation from Kaviyachol. And during this time of almost complete Hester Panim, so the Jew is no longer under the unique protection of Kaviyachol. The Hashgacha Protis, that's special to Klal Yisrael at this juncture, at this historical period, just does not express itself, does not manifest. And the Jews suffering in Mitzrayim became routine. Survivors of the Nazi concentration camps all related that after a time with a situation of torture, being tormented every day, all day long, and the suffering was almost unbearable, nevertheless, they related to it that this represented the normal course of events. It was futile to complain, pointless to cry and scream for help, and there was nobody to turn to. So the Torah now records that only with the death of old Paroi did the absurdity, the ugliness, reducing people to almost to a subhuman existence began to dawn on the Jewish people. They were no longer comatose. They were no longer without feelings, with frozen feelings. To this terrible, almost to this vulgar and ugly and horrible injustice that's being inflicted upon them. And they began to feel the deep, excruciating pain of slavery. And for the first time, they begin to protest. It was intolerable. So the Ramban says, even though they did not know the secret of prayer, but nevertheless, they beseeched the Almighty to help them for the first time. It was a cry of agony more than an expression of an intellectual type of cry for help. Because the Jewish people at this point did not know the secret of tefillah. They did not know exactly what the undertaking of prayer is. They simply shouted and they shrieked, but it was no more, says the Ramban, than a type of instinctual reaction to their suffering. But they suffered as human beings. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted it, says the Ramban, as if it was an intellectual, conscious tefillah with all the rules and regulations of prayer. And the reason is, says the Ramban, because after all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did have a covenant, a bris, with the Ovis HaKadoshim and promised them that they would be redeemed from slavery in Egypt. And all of a sudden, something remarkable is recorded in the Torah that our sages elaborate upon. The period of Hester Panim is over, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu now sympathizes, identifies, empathizes with his people. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, feels the anguish of their hearts, and now he becomes intimately involved in their destiny. Everything now, the Torah records, is ready for the great, great salvation and redemption. After the long, dark, dreary sojourn in slavery and affliction, the Jewish people now are starting the process of departing and leaving from Mitzrayim. This is the 210th year. He's served his term. The Jewish people have served their term, and every Jew has served his term. They paid their debt to the Hashgacha Elyono through hundreds of years, 210 years of subhuman existence. And the redemption is about to unfold, but there's still something missing. And that, of course, is the Goyim. And therefore, the Torah very abruptly changes its focus, and now the Torah focuses on Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Torah tells us, Moshe Yeroyes Tzoin Yisrei Chasonoi Koyin Midyan Vaynayes at Tzoin Achar Midbar. Why? So the Rishonim told us, because now everything is set for the redemption, but we still need the Redeemer. And who is going to be the Redeemer? Moshe Rabbeinu. Interesting. And what was Moshe Rabbeinu doing? He was 80 years old, says the Ramban. And Moshe was far away, tending to the flocks of sheep that belonged to Yisrael. And one of the most remarkable episodes in the entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, is what unfolds. In other words, the inconceivable dialogue between Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we will focus our attention at this point. Of course, the question is, why is Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership so indispensable? The answer is very simple, because the Rambam explains to us, Liyosid Lovoi, in the future, in the Messianic age, when Mashiach will come. So the Rambam regards the Moshe Mashiach as a catalyst for the intellectual advancement and the spiritual revitalization. Because subjugation to the influences, says the Rambam, of the Gentile empires causes desolation and spiritual depression. When Melech Mashiach will come, so not only will there be tranquility and freedom from oppression, but this will be the background for Melech Mashiach to teach profound wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there should be full of knowledge of Kaviyachol as the waters cover the sea. Hence the people, says the Rambam, all the people of the world, the Jewish people as well as the Gentile people, all the people of the world will be very wise, and they will know things, says the Rambam, that are now concealed, and they will attain an understanding of their Creator to the utmost capacity of the human mind. Likewise, it was necessary to have a Redeemer in Mitzrayim who can lead the Jewish people from Mitzrayim and restore the true belief in Kaviyachol and his omnipotence, that he's a Kol Yachol. The Redeemer is more of a teacher. His leading is an educational process. that the Jewish people in Mitzrayim should realize that the idols of Mitzrayim, which led ultimately, they were involved in an environment of idolatry, which influenced them to a large extent, and therefore the idols of Mitzrayim, which ultimately led to the memory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu becoming very obscured, were totally obliterated. On the night of redemption, all the idols were obliterated. The miraculous changes in the laws of nature through the Yud Makis that culminated with Makis Bechoros and the apocalyptic nature of Yetzias Mitzrayim produced an abundant and pervasive knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which was inculcated in the Jewish minds through the explanation, elucidation of Moshe Rabbeinu. So that is why the Redeemer is indispensable, because without the Redeemer, without the process of inculcating the phenomena that took place in nature, so it would be purposeless. It would not last, it would not be internalized, and it would not be knowledge of Kaviyachol, She'ein Oid Milvado, that would be inculcated upon the Jewish people. So this is why Moshe Rabbeinu leadership was indispensable. And interestingly, Moshe Rabbeinu was very stubborn, and he resisted the role. And this, at the time when he was supposed to be attending to the greatest deed in history, namely the creation of the Jewish people. Where was Moshe? Moshe Aroya Esatzoin, he was pasturing the sheep of Yisrael. And of course, we ask ourselves the question, why is this relevant? Could have simply told us that Moshe was in a faraway land and HaKadosh Baruch Hu called upon Moshe. The answer is, say the Chazal, that the Torah wants to describe for us in detail why Moshe Rabbeinu was chosen for this mission. Why was Moshe Rabbeinu chosen to be the Redeemer? So the Chazal tell us very, very clearly. The Medrash Rabbah asked this question, and the Medrash Rabbah explains very, very thoroughly the answer to this question. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Medrash Rabbah, is Beichen, he tries, he gives them trials to the righteous. By what does he try them? By tending flocks. What about David HaMelech? So where did HaKadosh Baruch Hu find David HaMelech to be the king of the Jewish people? So he found him to be a good shepherd, and he took him from the sheepfolds. Why? Because he used to stop the bigger sheep from going out before the smaller ones. And he would bring smaller ones out first so they would graze upon the tender grass. And afterwards, he allowed the old sheep to feed from the ordinary grass. And lastly, he brought forth the young, lusty sheep to eat the tougher grass. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw this, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu remarked, he who knows how to look after sheep, bestowing upon each the care that it deserves, shall come and tend my people. For following the ewes, he will be the one that will be the shepherd over the people of Yankov Avinu. And now the Chazal tell us that the Torah is telling us that Moshe was qualified to be the Redeemer. Why was he qualified? This is exactly what the Torah is telling us. Moshe was tested by HaKadosh Baruch Hu through sheep. And when Moshe Rabbeinu was tending the flock of Yisrael in the wilderness, like the Pasuk tells us, a little kid escaped from him. He ran after him until it reached a shady place. When it reached the shady place, there appeared to view a pool of water, and the kid stopped to drink. When Moshe approached it, he said to the small sheep, I did not know that you ran away because of thirst. You must be weary. So he placed the kid on his shoulder and walked away. Took him back to the flock, the runaway sheep. Thereupon HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, because you have mercy in leading the flock of sheep of a mortal man, that will assuredly tend my flock. And that's why the Torah tells us, so this was the test that Moshe had to pass. He was unaware that he was being tested. He passed the test, and because of this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu selected him to be the redeemer of the Jewish people. Moshe was a royat tzoyin, a pasture. So we're the Yomos HaKadoshim. And the pastoral life of a shepherd is not complicated. It requires one basic attribute. To be a shepherd, you need a great, great sense of care and concern for the sheep. As Yeshaya Novi says, the duty and the obligation of a shepherd is keroye edro yire, bizroye yikabet teloyim ubecheko yisoy sinayel. Even as the shepherd that feeds his flock and gathers the lambs in his arm, he carries them in his bosom and gently leads the young and weak lambs. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the final redemption will come, will take special care of those individuals broken in body and crushed in spirit when they return from captivity. The person is obligated to go in the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the main characteristic of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Yud Gimel Midah Shel Rachman, as we all know, is Midas HaChesed, kindness and generosity. And thus the main characteristic of a shepherd is kindness. And before HaKadosh Baruch Hu confers greatness upon a man, he tests him by an insignificant matter. Just like by David HaMelech, it would appear to us to be insignificant. And by Moshe Rabbeinu, only one little lamb ran away. He tests him by this insignificant matter to see whether he has a natural characteristic of kindness flowing from his heart. And then he elevates him to greatness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tested David HaMelech and Moshe with sheep and found them sensitive and trustworthy to be the leaders of the Jewish people. At this point, Moshe was discharging his responsibilities, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu selected him. The thunderbolt came through that he should be the leader of the Jewish people. However, this is not the end of the story. True, this was a test, and true, Moshe Rabbeinu had to pass the test. He passed the test with flying colors. But now the true test of Moshe Rabbeinu begins, as our Chazal tell us. Moshe Rabbeinu refused. He did not accept the mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu imposed upon him. Why did he not accept the mission? So Chazal tell us something remarkable. Because Moshe Rabbeinu said the one that deserves to be the redeemer of the Jewish people is Aaron. He was with them the entire time. He was their leader, ipso facto leader. He should be the redeemer. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, as our Chazal point out, L'cho ve'eshlachocha leparoi. I will send you to Paroi. Say the Chazal, the word L'cho is emphatic on account of the he at the end. as if to say, if you do not redeem them, no one else will. It's as if it says, L'cho, to you, it belongs to you. This is your mission. And if you don't do it, nobody will do it. So Moshe Rabbeinu refused. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu refuse? Very simply, because he did not want to offend Paro. And because he did not want to offend Aaron, excuse me, I made a mistake. He did not want to offend Aaron because he thought that Aaron would be upset that he takes over, as it were, the leadership role. So Kadosh Baruch Hu had to convince Moshe Rabbeinu v'racha v'samach b'liboy, Aaron HaKohen will be happy that you're the Redeemer, because Aaron HaKohen has absolutely no self-love. And the Chazal tells he's on your madrega, on your moral, ethical level, that you have no self-love. So we see over here that Moshe Rabbeinu, as Reb Reuven Grozovsky points out, came close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only because of his sensitive heart, insofar as the sheep were concerned. He passed that test, no question about it. He showed sensitivity. He was the trustworthy individual to redeem the Jewish people. But he had midas tovos, and the midas tovos, the good attributes, especially between man and his fellow man in the interpersonal relationships. So this made Moshe Rabbeinu into the great charismatic leader that he was, and his closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. This is taking something away from somebody. And therefore, said Reb Reuven Grozovsky, we see something unbelievable. Moshe Rabbeinu was willing to renounce his own personal greatness, was willing not to be the redeemer of Klal Yisrael, was willing to forgo everything, Matan Torah. Kadosh Baruch Hu said the mission will only be implemented by you. Without you, there is no mission. The Jewish people will be assimilated. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, I won't do it, because if Aaron HaKohen will feel that I'm taking something away from him, I'm asking full, I'm going into his territory, I'm usurping something which belongs to him, so it's not worthwhile. We don't understand why Moshe Rabbeinu would renounce to HaKadosh Baruch Hu personally when he was charged with this mission. Why would he renounce his own personal greatness? And we also don't understand why he was indifferent to Klal Yisrael. So we heard from Rabbi Baron Kotler the answer to that, because Moshe Rabbeinu realized that ultimately the purpose of the redemption of Klal Yisrael is to give the Torah. And Torah is acquired with Mem Ches Dvarim ShaTorah Niknes B'hem. There's 48 ways you acquire the Torah. Most have to do to an ethical and moral behavior. And had this behavior been relegated to be partially immoral, partially unethical, so therefore there cannot be a Torah, because the one that will have to deliver the Torah, the one that will be the great messenger of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu to transmit the Torah, so he has to first acquire the Torah to transmit it. And if he's lacking in one of the Mem Ches Dvarim ShaTorah Niknes B'hem, he has an insensitivity. He's indifferent in his interpersonal relationship to his brothers. Better not to have a Matan Torah, better not to have a Jewish people. Unbelievable. But more than that, we see that Moshe Rabbeinu, the great Moshe Rabbeinu, had a tremendous gratitude. And he got involved in a polemic with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he said, unbelievably, that he cannot accept the mission for another reason. After HaKadosh Baruch Hu assured Moshe Rabbeinu that Aaron will be delighted, he'll be happy that you'll be the Redeemer, he surely renounces his position as a Manik B'Yisrael and gives it over to you in a silver platter. He'll be happy in his heart. Such a great heart Aaron HaKohen has. Feels the happiness of somebody else's success, as the Chazal tell us. But there's another aspect over here that's very interesting. That Moshe Rabbeinu said as follows to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I will not accept the mission because Yisro loved me and he became my friend. I'm like a son to him. And in times of my distress and trouble, he brought me into his home, opened up his house to me. And we learned one who opens his house to his friend, so the latter owes him his life. I owe him my life. I can't leave Yisrael. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, true Yisrael has received you and showed you great respect, reverence, and love. However, he'll also be willing to allow you to go for this mission. But you're absolutely right. You have to ask his permission. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, I cannot go without his permission. So Moshe returned to Yisrael, his father-in-law, and begged his permission to go. This is one of the most remarkable episodes in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu was qualified. Indeed, he was qualified to be the leader of Yisrael because he had godly midos, and he was ro'ui, he was the proper person, he had the right qualifications to emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Yud Gimel midos of Rachamim. And it's very interesting what the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir once said to answer a question of the Chayvus HaLevavos. The Chayvus HaLevavos, as we well know, was from the greatest, if not the greatest, author insofar as morality of the Torah is concerned. The Rambam told his son to learn Chayvus HaLevavos, and with that, he will be a great person. Chayvus HaLevavos lived in the 12th century in Spain. He was a Dayan in Spain, and he wrote his famous compilation of Midas Taivas, which is called Chayvus HaLevavos, the Applications of the Heart. The Chayvus HaLevavos in Shar Yichud HaMaisa leaves with a question. Very, very strange, but he asked the question. Yichud HaMaisa speaks about doing moral things with perfection. So he said that it's impossible to do chesed, kindness, with perfection. Why? Because when the Torah describes the obligation of doing chesed, so the Torah uses the words, so far as the Novi is concerned at least, Hisira Roev. When you see somebody who's hungry, you see a homeless person in the street, you see somebody dying of starvation, so you should give him food. If you see somebody naked, clothe the naked. So in order to do this chesed of clothing the naked or feeding the hungry, so in order to accomplish this b'shleimus, so you have to distance yourself from the act that you're doing. Because if you don't, and you're overwhelmed emotionally, and you feel the pain and the suffering of this needy person, so when you help him out, when you give him the food to eat and you clothe the naked, so basically it's not pure and from a pristine perspective altruistic. There's also partial egoism involved because it's a relief for you because you can't tolerate, since you're a sensitive Jew, to see such a tragedy. Nebech, a person is in need of food. So your heart is broken. So when you help him out, you're, as it were, getting rid of this heartache that you have. You're mending your heart. So what's the alternative? To do it cold, indifferent. That's not chesed. When you do chesed, it has to be an act of compassion, saturated with kindness from the beginning to the end. You have to identify. The Chazal tell us with the needs of the poor, downtrodden man. He's your brother. Always the Torah refers to Wa'ani as your brother. He's downtrodden, helpless, almost hopeless. So therefore, says the Chayvus HaLevavis, it's impossible to do chesed b'shleimus. If you do it cold and indifferently, it's not chesed. And if you do it with a warm, emotional feeling of the heart, so you're also doing something for yourself. So it's not totally altruistic. It's missing in Shleimus HaMaisa in the complete, perfect act. So Reb Chaim Shmulevitz said that Moshe Rabbeinu answered this question. Because the pasuk says, "Vayihi bayomim harabim ohem, vayigdal Moshe, vayetze el echov, vayar b'siv loisam." So Rashi says, "Nosan eino v'liber liyos meitzer aleya." So Chaim Shmulevitz carefully explained something which the others simply did not see. Very interesting. Rashi says, "Vayigdal Moshe." Moshe grew up. Vayetze el echov. He went out to his brothers. He heard about their downtroddenness, their dismal situation. So he went out to his brothers, and he saw their afflictions. What does Rashi mean to say, Nosan ein of the liba liyos meitzer leah? As it were, right, he felt in his heart and in his inner sight, he was interested in identifying with their tzar. But as of yet, he was not in the field where they were being afflicted, and he could not feel the tzar that he would feel when he actually saw what was happening. So Chaim Shmulevitz said, one of the great Yesodus of all time, true, what the Chayvus HaLevavis says, that if you do tzedakah, charity, you have a charitable heart, because of rachamim, you can't do it solely because it's Gzeras HaMelech. You can't do it cold. You can't do it indifferent. You can't do it with a distant feeling from the Yoni. You have to do it with feeling. No question about it. That outflowing compassion must be extant. Nevertheless, there's one case, one situation, which is not oisel l'toivas atzmoi. It's not, he's doing it for his own benefit. Litchois me'olav regesh atzar v'achemlo, to relieve himself from the feeling of pain and compassion that he has for this person. When is that? When he looks to get a heartache, when he looks to be full of pain and suffering, when he knows that in the field you have people that are broken, downtrodden, Jewish people, and he wants to go there to help them. And he realizes when he goes to the field to help them, he'll be overwhelmed with pain. So he's searching for the pain. When somebody searches for the pain, he's nosan einov v'liber liyos meitzer leah, even though b'shas ma'aser, when he comes to the field and he sees that he's totally broken, like the Chazal tell us by Moshe Rabbeinu, he cried, he could not tolerate to see how they were being afflicted. He took away their tools. He started working instead of them. He started becoming the slave instead of them. He was overwhelmed. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't tolerate it anymore. But that's still a perfect act of kindness because he searched for it. So if somebody does chesed only because, at least partially, in order to relieve himself from the tsar, correct, so he would not be somebody who pursues to do kindness by going into the crucible of unbelievable suffering of his downtrodden brethren. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a roidef chesed v'tzedakah. He pursued it. And how did he pursue it? Even in the confines of the security of the palace, when he heard about the fact that his brothers were being treated subhuman. So already then he was Nasan Eino V'Liboy, Liyois Meislem. He was searching that he should be able to identify with their tsar. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the most qualified, the most godlike figure we ever had, and that's why he was the Redeemer. He was selected to be the Redeemer, because he will be able to inculcate on the Jewish people the Shechina. He's a Kol Yochel, a compassionate father, and he will be able to interpret and explain the events of the miracles of Mitzrayim and Matan Torah properly, to realize Am Yisrael, the special, unique level that Am Yisrael must come to.